Hi everybody and welcome to another edition of the We Are Mission podcast. I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by Archbishop Leo Cushley. Your Grace, thanks very much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
So, if you could tell us a wee bit about your background for people who maybe don't know about it.
Sure. Well, I'm from Lanarkshire and I am a priest originally of Motherwell Diocese. And I found myself, after training and working in Lanarkshire, I was asked to work elsewhere, to work abroad for the Vatican, but that meant not living and working in the Vatican, but traveling around the world. And it meant that I got to visit many countries, including countries that we characterize as mission countries.
And if we just dial it back a wee bit, when you were at school and things like that, did you always have an interest in religion? Did you come from a very traditional Catholic family? Was faith very an important part of your life?
Sure. We went to Mass every Sunday. Not long after I made my first communion, the parish priest said, "I think you should be in the altar." And so I said, "Well, okay then." And I did that till I was about 13, 14. And then one time when I was in secondary school, a friend of mine had this bright idea that I should go on the school trip. And the school trip was going to Rome, and it was a holy year. And I think it had a deep impression upon me. I had a lot of fun with great friends, but I can also remember standing in St. Peter's Square on Easter Sunday and Pope Paul VI of happy memory blessing us. And there were, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of Catholics all packed into this. And I think it started something, and it got me thinking, this is something I would like to be part of. And I've got a feeling that it grew from there.
So you think that was probably the catalyst for your vocation?
Perhaps. I mean, at the same time, the church and the school and the priests who were there working they were friends with my mum and dad, and they were part of the landscape. And so I think it was more of a slow burn. It certainly wasn't a lightning bolt that hit me one day. It wasn't like that. It was something slower. I think everyone has different ways into discovering what God wants of them in their lives, and that's the way I found it anyway. That we grow into it, and that's how I ended up here. Slightly to my surprise, but on the other hand, it's been a good journey and a happy one, and I've been very happy to become a priest and to do the work that I'm doing with my whole life.
Had you ever considered anything else? Like when you were at school, was there anything like you thought you maybe wanted to be when you were younger?
Sure. I'd still have discussions with people about things like physics or astronomy or art. I could have imagined myself loving being in the world of the arts, especially fine arts. I could have imagined myself rather perhaps pridefully building the Hubble telescope and getting involved in the NASA space program or something. And I would have loved that. I was good at these things at school, but I was good at other stuff as well. And the journey, after a number of decisions, took me in the direction that I found myself going.
And when you went on that journey, you went on your kind of vocational journey, was there anything that surprised you? You know, there's a lot of stereotypes about becoming a priest and things like that. Was there anything that surprised you along the way?
There was a lot to learn. I remember my first year in seminary. I hated it. I wanted to go home, but after a year there, I made friends, and I got to like it. I got to enjoy it. I really did.
Bless you. In terms of vocation, you touched on it a wee bit. What does the term vocation mean to you in its broadest sense?
Well, I think it's what it says in the tin. A vocation is a calling. It's that you discern God's call for you, and my own experience of it was that I thought I was listening to what God wanted me to do, and I found myself accepting that, and getting my will in line with God's will as I understood it. But there were certain parts of my life, as it were, that I sort of wanted to keep to myself. There were things I didn't want to have to do. I imagined that if I worked in Lanarkshire and I was a priest there in Motherwell Diocese, well, that would mean naturally I wouldn't be going to the missions. I wouldn't become a kind of missionary, and there wouldn't be a lot of travel involved. But it looks like the Lord had other plans for me, because that's exactly what happened to me. And I didn't go looking for it, but it came looking for me. And I found myself, I worked in a dozen different countries abroad, and it was completely unexpected. I didn't look for it, but as I say, I grew into it, and I got to like it. I got to embrace that and enjoy it very much. So vocation it's always surprising, but if you entrust yourself to the Lord, He will act on your behalf. That's been my experience anyway.
Fantastic. In terms of like, is there a saint, a particular saint or saints, or a scripture passage that kind of defines or inspires your vocation?
Well, in the middle of all of this, I remember reading a biography of St. Francis Xavier. Francis was one of the closest friends of Ignatius of Loyola. And I remember reading this when I was working in Southern Africa, and I was really struck by it, and it's never left me. That's nearly 20 years ago, but it felt like it was emblematic of the best of what we can be if we respond to God's call to mission, to be there, to go out and preach the good news, to live the good news with other people. And Francis Xavier was someone who was sent almost by accident to the other end of the planet. He wasn't meant to be the guy that was going to go. But Ignatius ran out of people, and he turned to his best friend, and he had 48 hours to go before the boats were leaving. And he said, "Would you be prepared to go?" And he said, "Sure." And off he went. And he never came home. He never saw his friends again, or his family, or Ignatius for that matter. And he went all the way to Japan, and died within sight of China. And it's a lovely story, but it's a story also of great courage and of great faith, and it's deeply moving. And so for me, perhaps one of the greatest of them all is Francis Xavier. Definitely worth checking out.
And just in terms of, obviously it's going to be very, very difficult when you get to the level of an archbishop. You've got lots of responsibilities and things, wanting all your time and things like that. But that's the same whether you're a priest or a seminarian. There's lots of difficulties that you have to deal with. And when you're faced with those difficulties, where do you draw strength from?
I think from prayer. I think from being close to the living Lord, especially in the Eucharist, and also prayer to Our Lady. I mean, these are the classics, but they are the classics because they are great sources of consolation and strength to us all. So I've always kept a few prayers close at hand in my head, in my heart, like a prayer called the Memorare, which you can go and check out, and the Rosary. When I was young, I found it a little bit boring, I'll be honest. But the older I've become, the more its shape and simplicity has actually appealed to me. And finding time to be still before the Lord, especially in the Blessed Sacrament. As I say, these are things that are classics, but they're things that I personally have always drawn strength from as well, and that I think others who have not tried them could as well if they wanted to explore that.
In terms of, we'll get to where your vocation has taken you in a wee minute or two, but your first impressions of life as a priest in Scottish parishes, what was that like, and how were you received in the parishes you served?
Well, I was received very, very welcomingly indeed. I started off, my very first parish was the cathedral in Motherwell, and I still go back there, and I feel young. I feel a lot younger. I feel 40 years younger walking in the door, because it's not changed in a good way. It's not changed. It's still got that glorious window of Our Lady over the organ and the choir up the back, and it's still a special place for me. I was there with 3 other priests, and we had a great old time, but we worked hard, and we were great friends and colleagues to each other, and the people were extremely welcoming. And I meet people to this day. Just 2 days ago, I bumped into someone that remembered me as young Father Cushley 40 years ago, and it's lovely. It's still there. It's great. It's special.
And okay, you've had quite a brilliant vocational journey, if you will. Tell us a wee bit about where your vocation has taken you.
Well, as I say, I signed up for the Diocese of Motherwell, and Motherwell is Lanarkshire, and most of the parishes are in the northern half of Lanarkshire, so it's quite a compact part of the world. You can get to most places in about 20 minutes in a car. But in 1992, I was asked to come up and see Bishop Divine, and there was a letter there from the Secretary of State from the Vatican, and it was asking if I would be willing to become a member of the diplomatic service of the Holy See. And after a lot of reluctance and soul searching, I eventually said yes. That involves training because it's a very different life, a different mission. And I went to Rome, did the training, and 4 years after that letter came, actually, yes, 4.5 years after the letter came, I was sent off, and I was sent to all sorts of places, starting with Burundi in Central Africa and working my way around many other countries.
And just in terms of when you discern your vocation, does the thought ever cross your mind that one day you might become an archbishop?
Well, in this particular case, because of the nature of the work, if they ask you to become a diplomat, they are training you with a view to becoming a full ambassador. And those who are in charge of our diplomatic missions tend to be archbishops. So they're telling you as a young man that all things being equal, we're going to train you and give you the experience that will put you there. And of course, that's the kind of thing that it's going to make you run a mile, because they're telling you will have this immense responsibility. And here you are, a young guy, minding your own business and having fun, meeting people in the parish. And all of a sudden, they're telling you, we're going to put this burden on your shoulders. So it gives you pause for thought. It doesn't look like a wonderful, happy prospect, if I'm very honest. But it becomes part of a sense of duty. And for me, duty is underestimated. Having a sense of duty of doing what the Lord is asking you to do is very important, and you've got to embrace that and embrace it willingly and embrace it lovingly. Otherwise, I think you'll be quite unhappy. At least that's my take on it. That's been my experience.
And could you share with us maybe if you've any kind of standout memories or stories from both your time as a priest and your time as an archbishop?
That is a good question. I suppose I've got lots of stories. It depends which day you catch me on when I'm doing that. But I can remember, for example, as a priest going to a cafe run by some local women when I was in Burundi, and we met these women, these lovely women, who were there. They were making coffee and tea and simple food for local workers to raise some money. And I asked, what's the money for? And they said, well, we're saving up and we're leaving it with this sister. There was a Filipino sister who was there, and they were leaving that money with her. And I said, and why are you doing that? And I discovered it was because they were all dying of AIDS, and you couldn't have told. But their days were numbered because antiretrovirals didn't exist at that time. And so they knew that their lives were going to come to an end, and they had to gather up this money, and the sister was going to look after the money so that their children would have it and their children would have a future. And it was a very sad thing to be part of, and yet they were lovely, joyful, faithful people who were doing the right thing for their families and their own people. And at times like that, it's very humbling. You find yourself just by showing up and being there with them and having a cuppa and having a chat, that you're supporting them, and you're not doing very much as you see it. But I still keep a picture of these women and of the Filipino sister who was gathering up their savings, and I've still got it hanging here to remind me of that, because it was a happy thing in its own way. Something good was being drawn out of something very sad. Something positive was being taken from that. and I was able to support that in that small way, simply by showing up, meeting them, and having a cup of coffee with them. And so you get to learn small lessons that small gestures can become very important ones for people in times of trial, times of crisis. And as bishop, well, I don't know, I've got lots of experiences to draw upon that too, but they're similar experiences because you remain essentially a pastor of souls. It's just a level, it's a certain degree, but it amounts essentially to living your life faithfully as a disciple of Jesus of Nazareth, and doing that as an ordained minister of the church. And so it's by degree. There's not a great deal of difference between being a priest and a bishop, in the sense that that's about slightly greater amounts of leadership between the two. But essentially, it still depends upon you being a faithful priest and a good shepherd to your people, but at different levels in the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to touch on that, you've mentioned some of the qualities that you would, or characteristics that a priest or a bishop would have. What are some other important qualities that a priest or someone who's a bishop or an archbishop needs to have?
I think you need to be obedient. I know that's not something that people like to think about much these days, at least that's the way it seems. But there is a great liberty to be had in being obedient. When you become a deacon and a priest and a bishop at the different levels, you're asked a set of questions very solemnly before you're ordained. And one of the very first ones, way back when you become a deacon, is to promise obedience to your bishop and his successors. And when we were young, we didn't think that was terribly important. We did it very willingly because we wanted to be deacons, we wanted to be priests. But it was only just beginning to dawn on us how important obedience to the bishop was, and obedience in another way, obedience to, as it were, the promises that you make, to fulfill the promises that you make and to be faithful to those promises, because there is a great deal of consolation and strength to be had from being faithful to your promises. So I see those two things as going together, in order to set you free, in order to make you free to go about your business. When you've entrusted your freedom to your superiors, whether it's the priest to the bishop or the bishop to the pope, it gives you a certain freedom. And what is that freedom for? It's not freedom to do whatever you like and to go and destroy yourself. It's freedom to do the will of God and to do it as well as you possibly can. And there is a great deal of satisfaction and fulfillment and happiness to be had from that. So it's obedience and faithfulness to your promises is something much, much more important than you might think it is, especially when you're younger.
And we've spoke a wee bit about there, and we've touched on, the responsibility of the role of being an archbishop, and the duty and things like that. What are some of the positive aspects of being Archbishop of St Andrews in Edinburgh, and what's some of the negatives, if there are any?
Well, if you look at the sense of the weight, the burden of the office is not often seen, and that there is a great deal that you have to consider about people and places and things, and skills that you didn't know you had, or maybe that you don't have at all, and you have to go and find people that can help you and advise you. And it's a thing I learned a long time ago, not to be afraid of people who are more gifted than you, in order to have them close to you to help you as the leader make the right decisions. But as to the positive, the good things, people are usually almost universally very kind and very respectful and very friendly. And the only problem, and it's not a problem, the only problem with that is that you don't always know who they are, but they know who you are, because you walk in the door and you've got the collar on and your face is quite well known. And of course, here in this diocese anyway, there are 130,000 Catholics, and I don't know them all by their names, as you might imagine. So it's a challenge, but you still get to know people, and it's a wonderful journey. It's good, but you've still got to stay on your toes.
And you've had such a variety in terms of your life serving the church. You've represented the church in the UN in New York. You were the head of the English language section, Secretary of State, Vatican. Two very high-profile roles, and you've served in a lot of the kind of apostolic nunciatures around the world, including in mission countries. So, tell us a wee bit about what those roles entailed. Did you develop a greater understanding of the global church and mission as a result? And did your time spent in these roles impact upon your spirituality in any way?
Yeah, well, certainly there's a lot that I've learned as a result that I didn't expect to learn from having the experience of working in mission countries in the United Nations, which is completely different. Instead of you start off working in a country, and that means that you're trying to foster good relations between a country and the Holy See, what we normally call the Vatican. And that's called bilateral relations. And that can be very interesting indeed, and you can get to know a country very well. And you end up strangely becoming an ambassador for that country with a small a, because once you know the people and you know the situation there, you can talk about it, hopefully reasonably intelligently. But you end up promoting it and defending it because you've got to know people and you know what it's like on the ground. And you have insights into that country that people that have not been there, well, they don't have. You cannot have unless you've been on the ground. Working in the United Nations adds something entirely different to that because it's multilateral. It's dealing with all sorts of countries all at once. And depending on the subject that's on the table that we're discussing, some people are friendly with you, some people are hostile to your opinions or doubtful of them. And then half an hour later, you can go into another meeting and the mosaic of relationships with these countries has completely changed because of the material that's on the table. And so again, that was an important lesson to learn, that at some point, some of the people who are not so friendly will become very friendly, and vice versa, depending on what you're talking about. And so to always leave the door open, to always to be cordial with people, because you never know when you're going to need each other for the next time. And that was a very good lesson too. And working in the Vatican was a great opportunity, the occasions that I was there, the years that I was there, to grow. You don't notice it, you don't realize it until you look over your shoulder and you see all the things that you've been able to do and the people that you've met. And hopefully you've had your eyes open enough to learn some good lessons that will stand you in good stead for the future.
And just in terms of did you kind of develop a greater understanding of the church and its mission in those roles?
Oh, definitely. In the countries that we call the mission countries, so places like Central Africa, where so much of MISSU Scotland's funding would go, yes, I got to see that firsthand. The nunciature, the Vatican's embassy, actually becomes a kind of conduit for the monies that are raised. I remember on one year that I was there, that the monies that had been identified to help children on the ground there had been raised in Motherwell Diocese by children on the ground there. And I was able to point this out to the nuncio, and I was very proud of that. It was lovely to see. But this was happening all the time. There were monies coming from all over the world, and it was like the church all over the world helping the church all over the world. And there we were as a kind of channel for all of that. And of course, the people would come to us and they would thank us, but they shouldn't have been thanking us. They should have been thanking you, the people who are the donors. But there was a genuine gratitude. And another thing that I liked about it was that it didn't feel patronizing. It felt like the hand of friendship between brothers and sisters of the churches, and very much like the first pages of the New Testament, where you have richer communities helping poorer communities. We see it in the letters of St. Paul. And we got to see that. We got to help make that happen on the ground through the generosity of people in MISSU. Not just the children, but others as well. But the Holy Childhood happens to be one of the three branches of MISSU. And it's great to see that. it's people helping people. It's brothers and sisters helping brothers and sisters, and it's very, very affirming. It's very life affirming.
In your own experience in these countries as well, did you feel that it deepened your spirituality a bit, these kind of personal experiences?
Certainly, no. It gives you a deep joy, a great satisfaction, and it encourages you in your faith to see that people are doing that they're thinking about people far away, and that they're digging deep, and they're looking to help them. And we would always say that we try to help them spiritually and morally and practically, so that it's all of those things. But the practical is certainly very welcome. The moral can be political, that can be seen as well visibly here and there. The spiritual is by definition less tangible, but it's still an important element of what drives us to do what we do, to reach out to people in love and in charity in its proper sense.
Now, you've had experience of having worked alongside the late Pope Benedict the 16th, but also Pope Francis. What was your relationship like with both men? What were their main qualities? And have you any special stories about them you can share with us?
Well, they were both very, very fine men, and it was a great honour to work for Pope Benedict and to work for Pope Francis. They were a little different in their approaches. It always struck me that if it would be a little bit like asking two brilliant people to play the piano for you and to play the same piece of music, but that they would play it in their own subtle ways, in their own different ways, putting emphasis in different places. And as I look back, that memory still that still functions for me. That is still a reasonable way of looking at them both. They had different characters though. Pope Benedict was more reserved. He was more I would characterize him as a Bavarian gentleman. And Pope Francis, meantime, you felt you could see a lot of his Jesuit background and training and experience. It's a different approach to the world. We had been trained by the Jesuits at the Gregorian University, so we had a lot of experience of meeting them and seeing them. And Pope Francis had been a leader of the Jesuits in his own country. Then he had been the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And in meeting him later on, having become a bishop myself, there was even more of a resonance in meeting Pope Francis once I had become a bishop, because I could see where I was talking to not just the Bishop of Rome, but the retired Archbishop of Buenos Aires, as it were. And so many of his experiences and stories and tips were showing me here he was a seasoned pastor of souls in a very big and important diocese, with all the good and all the not so good that comes with that. And it increased my understanding of him and what he's trying to do as Pope.
And obviously we had the joy of having Pope Benedict the 16th come to Scotland to visit. What was his thoughts on his visit to Scotland?
Well, I still have a letter hanging on the wall here that shows us what his thoughts were, which was that he was very grateful for it. I think his trip to Scotland at the beginning of the United Kingdom state visit in 2010, apparently it set the scene. I was there as part of the entourage. It apparently set the scene for the whole thing. I suppose it did inevitably, because it came at the start of the visit to the UK. And it was slightly surreal, but a great pleasure to be part of that, as he met Her late Majesty the Queen at Holyrood House, and as he came up Princess Street and then came to this house for his lunch, and then we followed him over to Glasgow for the Mass there in the beautiful autumn sunshine, even though the gendarmes that he brought from Italy thought it was very cold. And it was a beautiful autumn day, but that doesn't matter. We were very amused at this. But it was such a lovely, happy occasion. Someone said to me there were 125,000 people on Princess Street welcome the Pope. And I saw a part of that, but it was certainly a substantial number of people, and a lovely, happy occasion that the Catholics of Scotland deserved, and the people of Scotland welcomed, as far as I could see. And it certainly boosted our relations with our other Christian brothers and sisters here. And it was, of course, it was just the first course, because the next thing that the Pope was going to do was go to the Houses of Parliament and meet ecumenical leaders from all over the country. He was then going to beatify John Henry Newman, which was the original principal purpose of coming to the UK, and something that was very close to his heart, and that I think he did with great affection. And it was lovely to be part of that. But as I say, slightly surreal to be back in my own country in the company of the Pope, and watching it, as it were, as it took place.
And when he was here, did he get to try any of the Scottish delicacies?
He did, as far as I remember. He got some haggis while he was here. I don't think he got a dram at all. I think he tended to prefer Fanta, inexplicably. But anyway, that was what he preferred to have with his dinner. But he, as far as I know, he ate everything that was put in front of him.
And just in terms of, you touched on him being quite a reserved person. Now, obviously, popes throughout the ages, they have to deal with lots and lots of numbers of people. But was he quite taken aback with the reception that he got in Scotland, given that we're not, per se, a Catholic country?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It started off as a very quiet day, and when we drove from the airport to Holyrood House through Corstorphine, it was very, very quiet, and I wondered if there was going to be a reception for the Pope at all. But little did we know that everyone was prepared to welcome him down in Princes Street. And so in that few hours that we were here in Edinburgh, there was this great contrast. And we were wondering if this was going to be a success or not. And it turned out very well indeed, and to everybody's great satisfaction.
Now, Your Grace, you as we said, you've had experience of mission countries. What does the term mission mean to you?
Missio, I go back to what it means in Latin, which is to be sent. That it is something to do with being sent by the Lord. It's something that takes us back to the apostles, who were the first people to be sent by the Lord with the good news and with His blessing to take the good news to people. Nowadays, it's slightly different. We used to think of this being very much us taking the good news to other people. Nowadays, it's slightly different. Certainly in this diocese, St Andrews in Edinburgh, it sponsored a diocese in Nigeria. And that was a long, long time ago. That was 60 plus years ago. And I now find that there are priests coming from that diocese back here to celebrate Mass and to spend a couple of years in our parishes helping. And they're the ones bringing the good news back to us, or at least a pastoral outreach and service to us. It's almost as if Missio is something that you share with somebody and they share it back with you. That's the way it feels sometimes anyway to me, that mission isn't a one-way street at all. It brings immeasurable benefits back to the people who are prepared to go on mission, who are prepared to be sent by the Lord and by the Church with the good news.
Yeah, and here in Scotland and in other countries as well, we talk about how important lay people within the Church are. In terms of lay people, how can lay people in Scotland be missionaries? What's the best way that they can live out their mission?
That's a good question. Well, you can do it in a couple of ways, maybe 3 ways. One of them is to be like Francis Xavier, where you get sent and you go to the other end of the world and you don't come back. So you could do that, and some people do that. Or you could do it like Saint Teresa of Lisieux. Now, she's the patroness of the missions, but she never left her convent. She stayed in Normandy for her entire life and died at 24, and yet she is the international patroness of the missions. So how does that work? Well, it works through that spiritual and moral support that we were talking about. And the third way is the practical, the financial as well, so that without leaving the comfort of your living room, you can help people who are on the ground with your spiritual and moral and practical support. And those are the three ways of doing it, and they're all correct and they're all good. But what you have to do is one of them. so choose one and get going, and it will be fulfilling. And it's a part of who we are, and that goes for all of us. It's not just for people with collars on or veils on if they're nuns. It's for us all. We are all called to live the good news and speak about the good news when we get the chance.
Fantastic. Yeah, and also one of those ways in which people can support our brothers and sisters in mission countries and territories is to support the work of MISSU Scotland and its partners in the Pontifical Mission Societies. Why would you say it's important for people to support the work of MISSU Scotland and the PMS?
Because it's doing what the Lord asks us to do. We see it at the end of the Synoptic Gospels, where the Lord sends out his disciples, he sends out his apostles and disciples, and that means you and me by extension. We see it happening back then, 2,000 years ago, where the Lord sends them out to preach the good news and to baptize those who are willing to be baptized. But it's not just for the specialists, and it's not just for the hierarchy. It's for us all. There is a part of all of us that ought to have a missionary spirit, and we ought to have somewhere deep down a missionary heart.
And obviously, being a member of the hierarchy of the church here in Scotland, what would you say your hopes are for the future of the church? How do you see the church landscape at the minute?
In Scotland, because of our history, the Catholic Church tends to focus upon Catholics. It tends to focus upon its own people. And there are good historical reasons for that. How to reach out to people, how to preach the good news. I think it was Francis of Assisi who said, "Preach the gospel at all times, and sometimes even use words." So in other words, preaching the gospel is about living the gospel. It's about putting it into action, and it doesn't necessarily mean opening your mouth to talk about it. There will be opportunities in the workplace or on the bus or down the street to talk about it, but that usually, in my experience, it comes along second. It comes along because people are curious about the way you live and the way you act and what you do. And they begin to get curious about, well, what is it about Christianity? What is that? What is that Catholic thing that makes you tick, that keeps you going? And that becomes a better opportunity, a golden opportunity to talk about the faith. That would be my approach anyway. It's about living your faith authentically. That is preaching the good news, and the rest will come later on.
Thanks very much, Your Grace. You've been really, really generous with your time. Usually what we do when we have an interviewee is we ask them this one final question, and it is there something that you can tell us about yourself that people might not know?
Let me think.
Have you any particular hobbies or skills?
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm very good at building air fixes, but I don't think people do that much anymore. So, up in my room, I've still got one or two wee models that are still to be done. I think I've still got a Messerschmitt and a Spitfire that are still needing done. So we'll see. So maybe that's something to look into, but it's a hobby of people of my generation. I don't know that others are into that, but there are still model shops around. You can check them out. It's good fun.
Yeah, it's a bit of a lost art. That.
Don't make a mess of the carpet, though. Your mum won't be very pleased.
Your Grace, thank you very much for giving so much of your time. I know that you're a very, very busy man, so thank you very much once again for joining us.
Thank you.
MISSU Scotland is the Scottish branch of the Pontifical Mission Societies, the Pope's official charity for overseas mission. To learn more about the work of MISSU Scotland, you can visit our website www.missuscotland.com. You can like us on Facebook, www.facebook.com/MISSU Scotland. You can also follow us on Twitter, MISSU_Scotland, and on Instagram, MISSU Scotland. If you would like to donate to MISSU Scotland, visit www.missuscotland.com/donate. You can also call us on 01236 449 774 or send donations to MISSU Scotland, 4 Laird Street, Coatbridge, ML5 3LJ. Please keep us in your prayers. Thank you and God bless.